it's not his ghost that haunts Pond Square rather enchantingly. It's the ghost of the chicken that he killed and plucked. And it sort of appears, it startled a chap walking across the square in the 1940s by sort of dropping out the sky in front of him, running to and fro, squawking, and disappeared through a wall.
There are tales of rogues and whores, of stratagems and wars. There's a tale for every season of the year. There are tales of knights and queens, of drudgery and dreams. There's a tale for everybody here. There are stories galore, in volumes by the score, on every subject throughout history. It's all waiting in Pandora's library.
Welcome to Pandora's Library, a monthly podcast about books that feature the mysterious, fantastical, dark, and creepy elements of life. If you're listening on the audio podcast, that's great, but if you prefer a visual podcast, you can find it on Spotify and YouTube. My name is Karen Hamilton-Vile. I'm a paranormal murder mystery author of a series of books about Ada Baker, a medium who solves murders with the aid of the ghost she lives with. This month, I'm interviewing author Ian Simmons. Ian is news editor of the Fortean Times, the world's leading magazine on the weird, and is a regular contributor to The Chat magazine. He's published several books on the strange and fantastical anomalous oddities that haunt the shadows of this world, and is shortly publishing his new book, Haunted London, which I'm sure is going to be a staple on every paranormal enthusiast's bookcase. Ian, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
We sort of met via an Essex writers chat group, didn't we? On there, that's where I found you.
That's right. Yes. It's a great place to connect with other writers locally. So, it's a really good resource. As you can see, I lurk in a book-lined pit. So it's the sort of thing that's right up my street.
And you kindly sent me a copy of your book, An Opinionated Guide to Haunted London, Ghouls, Ghosts, Spirits and Seances, which is launching soon. Can you tell us more about it?
Yes. It's a book I've done with Hoxton Mini Press. It's part of their series of books. For those of you who've got the visual podcast, I'm waving one of their previous books, Weird London, at the camera. They're a really great little publishing house who do London-related books, and their opinionated guidebooks to all sorts of aspects of London. They're really nicely produced with great photographs, and they asked me to do their Haunted London. So I've had great fun researching and writing about London's best ghosts, or at least the ghost stories.
I love the fact that it's got so people can go and visit the site. So says what's the nearest tube station, and it's got some maps and things as well, so people can actually go and visit this site once they've read your book.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. I mean, the whole point is to give people an opportunity to wander around and have a look at the sites of infamous hauntings. And as I say in the book, I mean, I can't guarantee that they'll see a ghost, but they'll certainly have fun exploring the atmospheric and spooky, and sometimes not at all spooky, places that London ghosts actually appear. I do say in the book, of course, that they are quite likely to bump into a ghost if they manifest, because ghosts mostly appear in broad daylight, not in crepuscular gloom.
So that was my experience. The only ghost I really saw was in broad daylight. So yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, most people do that. I mean, it's only in ghost stories and films that, people encounter them in the dark, and that's just because that it builds up the atmosphere. Whereas in reality, they just turn up as and when in the places that they that they haunt.
What inspired you to write this book? And perhaps following on from this, which book do you think has been the most influential in the paranormal world?
Well, what inspired me to do it was they offered to pay me. It was commissioned. So, but it's the waters I swim in because, as Fortean Times news editor, ghosts are among the things that regularly come my way. So, it's completely in my in my area of interest and expertise, and so I was an obvious person to write it, I guess. Plus, I'm really opinionated, and if they wanted an opinionated guide, they came to the right person. Um, as to what is the most influential book, um, in the sort of world of paranormal, etc. I would probably say the collected books of Charles Fort. Well, I would do being from the Fortean Times, but
Mm.
I think even if I weren't, I would say that's the case. It's perhaps less well known than a lot of books about the paranormal, but if you go back to Fort's original books, which were written between 1919 and 1932, he goes through all sorts of things, even prefiguring UFOs in new lands and so on. And it covers poltergeists, ghosts, weird falls, spontaneous combustion, all sorts of things that are part of the paranormal, and that leaked out into science fiction and all sorts of things in the 20s and 30s and in the subsequent years. And it's literally so sort of deeply soaked into the groundwater of the paranormal that most people don't realize a lot of the topics and approaches and thoughts about this sort of stuff originated with Fort and his books. So I feel that it's had an enormous influence.
Perhaps a topic for a future book, all about him, maybe.
There are several good ones. I particularly like Damon Knight's biography.
For me, my favourite book, the one that influenced me, was this one, The Folklore, Myths and Legends of Britain, which is very well known, I think, amongst a lot of people that like the paranormal. But
Well,
it definitely inspired
absolutely.
me and set me on the path.
Yes, I mean, it did that for me. My father got it when it came out in the early 70s, and I still have his copy on the shelf back there.
Yeah, I think everyone keeps their copy, don't they?
Yes, mine's still got the dust cover, which is quite cool.
Oh, wow. Excellent.
And yes, I devoured that. It's really quite good because, I mean, most Reader's Digest books are considered to be basically trash by book dealers and so on, but this one is worth quite serious money,
It is,
and
yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's there's a good reason for that. The Unlike the usual Reader's Digest approach, which seemed to be back then, getting a load of hacks to just sort of knock out stuff on a theme. There, they seem to have rounded up really good writers like Catherine Briggs and
Oh,
so
yeah.
on.
I love her Book of Fairies. It's brilliant. Yeah.
Yes, so there's really good folklorists in there and proper historians, and they didn't stick to the sort of really conservative, old style authors who you might imagine the Reader's Digest might go for. There's some quite sort of mystical and visionary and experimental for their period writers who contributed to that book, which gave it a sort of foundational hauntology folk horror vibe. They had great illustrators as well.
Oh, yeah. That's one of my favourite bits, yeah.
as a result, it produced a book which has been really resonant throughout the folklore of mysteries, etc. community, and it chimed in at a time when people like John Michel was doing things like View Over Atlantis, and when ley lines were quite prominent, and that sort of mystic approach to the past of archaeology was quite in the ascendant, and earth mystery stuff, but also folklore revival was going on again. I mean, there's a folklore revival every 10 years. Takes on slightly different flavors. But this was, particularly influential. It's the same time that, films like The Wicker Man and Witchfinder General and all those sort of things were coming out. So it went with the flow very nicely. And it was certainly influential on huge numbers of people. I was definitely influenced by that. I sort of remember reading it sort of goggle-eyed and wow, all this stuff. At the same time, I was also mainlining Brad Steiger UFO pulp books, going, why didn't they tell us all this? Of course, mostly because it's they're rather, as I understand it, they're rather loosely based in the factual, but nonetheless absolutely vibing and inspiring. But probably the first thing that actually caught my attention about weird stuff was a kid's annual that I got for Christmas in about 1969 called Stranger Than People, which mixed stories about real stories about Edgar Casey, about UFOs, about cryptids and so on, with some fairly awful, to be honest, science fiction. And it wasn't entirely clear to my childhood mind which were real and which were not, which kind of set me up for the sort of blur between reality and unreality that is a hallmark of all this stuff. And then it was, my fate was totally sealed as a scout jumble sale in Croydon, when a friend of mine got a copy of the Abacus edition of Charles Fort's Book of the Damned out of a heap of books that were just being tipped out onto the book table at the jumble sale, and he waved at me and said, "You like this weird shit, don't you?" And I looked at it and I said, "Yes, I do like this weird shit." Bought it for 5p. I mean, reading it, I just thought he was it was completely far out, and he was he was some sort of random fringe lunatic. And it was only, later that I realised that this stuff actually fed into a whole culture. And I thought, yeah, that's me. That's totally me. It did help that I could read it, because a lot of people bounce off Fort's literary style, which is quite, shall we say, difficult. He is fascinating, but you do have to get over the words. So actually, let me bring this up. I can read you a bit of Fort to give you a sense of the of quite what he sounds like. This is from Fort's third book, Low, and it's as good in a statement of intent for the Fortean Times as anything. A naked man in a city street, the track of a horse in volcanic mud, the mystery of reindeer's ears. A huge black form like a whale in the sky, and it drips red drops as if attacked by celestial swordfishes. An appalling cherub appears in the sea. Confusions, showers of frogs and blizzards of snails, gushes of periwinkles down from the sky. The preposterous, the grotesque, the incredible. And why, if I am going to tell hundreds of these, is the quite ordinary so regarded?
Amazing.
So that's Fault in Full Flight. And I mean, that is him being sort of dramatic and declamatory. And he does calm down a bit in the sort of main text of talking about things, but it's still quite quite a unnatural form of writing for the modern reader. Although if you go back to the 20s and look at people who were around for it, people like Booth Tarkington and all those kind of writers, and read their stuff, you can see where he fits in. There's a good reason why the great American writers of the 1920s, the majority, or the ones who are considered to be the great writers of the 1920s, are no longer read. Their prose style is quite sort of compacted and difficult, and not necessarily in a good way. Fault kind of takes that, but attacks it with a lot more brio, and applies it to the weird stuff. It's great fun. I love it. It was a very entertaining read and very good sort of pithy phrases like one measures a circle beginning anywhere, and so on.
I'll definitely take a look. How long did it take you to write Haunted London? What research did you do?
It was about 3 months. It's quite a short book. And each ghost gets 100 words. Research I sort of nosed about in lots and lots of books about London's hauntings. That's part of the research pile.
Oh, wow.
And went and visited a few places to sort of have a look at them and so on. I'm based just outside London in South End, so it's quite easy to pop up. And sort of distilled I did some online research, of course, as well. Distilled the the stories down, because actually I find that a lot of people who write about London ghosts or any ghosts really pad the stories. Sometimes it was a struggle to get them into 100 words, but a lot of them, you can sort of nail the essence of the haunting in 100 words, and and get it nice and tight and punchy. I found that I was having to wander through vast quantities of verbosity in a lot of the stuff to get there. But there are some great books out there on ghosts that were a great help. But it was lots of fun to write. I mean, one of the things is when you're talking about ghosts, you're talking about rumor, folklore, sort of oral culture, really, in which people have told each other stories and had experiences that they relate and so on. And people have quite different stories that they tell about each ghost, because different people have had different experiences. And then as the stories have been passed from person to person, they've kind of evolved and expanded somewhat. So it's very difficult to tell whether ghosts are fabricated, real, or what exactly was going on. So it leaves the writer free to pick the most exciting and imaginative version of it, because it's a story. And that was a lot of fun. Some of them were sort of lurid and crazy, and there's a lot that were quite boring, which I haven't included, because London has thousands of ghosts, and I only had 60 to write up. So of course I went for things like the Phantom Bus of Notting Hill, the uh, um, uh, the the ghost chicken of Pond Square, the sex dolphins, that sort of thing.
So, if a spirit has followed you home from one of the haunted locations in your book, which one is it, and should people be scared of it?
Which one would follow me home? I do quite like that phantom chicken. Mm.
I love that.
Yes, I mean it's a plucked chicken that
Oh,
runs
is it?
riot in
Oh, wow.
Pond Square in Hampstead. It's supposed to be um, uh, go back to the 17th century and the um, uh, seminal experiment about refrigeration carried out by Francis Bacon. And as I have a background as a scientist, I always like a science ghost. Basically, he confirmed that refrigeration worked by getting a chicken from a local farm, plucking it, killing it first, plucking it and stuffing it with snow. And legend has it that he actually caught a chill, which he died of from doing this. That's not quite true, although he did die shortly after the experiment. And it's not his ghost that haunts Pond Square, rather enchantingly. It's the ghost of the chicken that he killed and plucked. It sort of appears it startled a chap walking across the square in the 1940s by sort of dropping out the sky in front of him and running to and fro, squawking, and disappeared through a wall. And on another occasion, it put a courting couple canoodling on a bench completely off their stride by manifesting next to them. And I mean, that's such a fun ghost.
It definitely would, wouldn't it?
I really like a sort of surreally daft ghost, and that's definitely one of the best on that sort of. And I mean, if it did follow it home, I'd probably see it off with a minor banishing ritual. So yes, there's my late friend Steve Moore collaborated with his friend and magical partner Alan Moore to write these Moon and Serpent Bumper Book of Magic, which is kind of like a big thick children's annual, but for the occultly inclined, and it contains useful instructions for banishing rituals.
Okay, I'll check that one out. I don't know that one. Brilliant. So it's a great book though, because it's all sorts of different places. So you've got tube trains, you've got haunted houses, churches. So it's a little bit of everything for everyone, isn't it?
Yes. I try to get everything in. The Tube's got a lot of ghosts. And Transport for London's a bit nervous about them. I poke gentle fun at TfL about their attitude to ghosts in the book. But yes.
If I was going to do an investigation, I think I'd love to do one on the London Underground, one of the haunted stations. Would be really interesting.
Yes. I'm not sure that investigations ever turn anything up, though, because ghosts do their own thing, and they're not, and they manifest when the conditions are right, and nobody knows what those conditions are. And they're not there all the time. They're not there to order, and they are definitely not amenable to equipment. I mean, the thing with ghost hunting and and going out with all the kit and that is that it doesn't really detect actual ghosts. It's just that people have redefined ghosts as the things that the equipment detects. I mean, and nobody calibrates it to the environment over a period, so you can't tell whether that cool patch is there because it's a ghost. And whilst ghosts produce cold patches, it generally goes with the manifestation of the ghost, and that the appearance of a cold patch has now been redefined as evidence of a ghost. But actually, evidence is a ghost is seeing a ghost, and there is no other evidence for a ghost apart from seeing one, because we don't actually know what they are, and they may not be all the same things. Poltergeists. Something completely different from, the ghost of a priest wandering through a church or something. As like there's a whistling ghost priest in St Paul's Cathedral, and that has very little in common with the Enfield poltergeist, except they both make noises. But they're both classed as ghosts, but they've got very little in common. And one ghost, and then you get other ghosts that seem to have very little in common with each other. I mean, the one we didn't include was the Bethnal Green tube disaster during the Second World War. 60 people were killed in a crush trying to get an air raid shelter, Bethnal Green tube station. We were originally going to put it in, but it turns out there are still people who as children survived the disaster, and it felt impolite, shall we say, to sort of have to put it amid the other opinionated ghosts. But that just replays the sound late at night to be heard by spooked tube station employees, and that again completely different from Anne Boleyn manifesting at Hampton Court. There's very little in common. So ghosts could have multiple causes, and a whole bunch of them are probably don't exist at all, but purely exist as the stories. If you go back to through a lot of the pub ghosts, for example, you can track their origins to publicity-hungry landlords over the last couple of 100 years, and they've just sort of, it's like any number of pubs are the oldest pub in England, or the smallest pub in England. There's about 12 of those, and every pub has to have a ghost. Most of them do. Some actually do. I particularly like, I forget the name of the pub now, but there's a pub in East London which has the Phantom Flusher, which is a haunted toilet cubicle in the ladies that flushes randomly whilst people are sitting on it and gives them a nasty shock, and doesn't do anything else really. Just sort of it's been going for years. Various landlords have tried to fix it, but the plumbing problems seem to be intractable. One landlord actually had to go at exercising it. He did not like it and slammed the cubicle door open, smashing the mirror. Since they've just lived with it. So yeah, I mean, these things are just.
I agree. I think that a lot of my experiences that were unexpected, places where one of them I knew it was a haunted location, but I was staying with a friend in Mitchell and Priory.
Oh yeah,
And in the night it sounded like somebody was dragging a piano across the floor, and it wasn't my friend. We couldn't find any reason for it, and we had a tornado, a whirlwind going around our head, but completely unexpected. I wasn't really looking for ghosts or thinking about ghosts at the time. But when you go on an investigation, it's never quite that dramatic, I don't think.
No.
What's your passion in the paranormal world? So mine's poltergeists, because that was my first paranormal experience. But
I'm very
yours?
fond of Pulse. They're one of my favourites. But I mean, I'm generally, I'm quite wide ranging in my interests. So there's no individual thing that sort of I'm completely obsessed with. But I am very fond of poltergeists. I like fairies as well. I think those are actually two of the things which have some claim to be to have an objective existence. Because they're so consistent. If you look at poltergeists, the 19th century pulp that pop up in Fort behave in exactly the same way as the Enfield poltergeist, a century later. And the and in turn, it's extremely similar to the recent one that's gone off in Bulawayo in Zimbabwe, and which has a lot of similarities to the one at Humpty Doo in Australia about 30 years ago. And so across the world and across time, they do the same things. There is a repertoire of behaviours that poltergeists pull off, and they have multiple witnesses. They do things that are completely impossible, but the same things that are completely impossible. And they aren't really influenced by anything externally. The polts just keep on polting, and nothing really changes. But you contrast that with, say, UFOs, which are hugely culturally driven. You got greys because Whitley Strieber's Communion put greys on every bus stop and bookshop display and things like that, and suddenly that was the thing that everybody was seeing. Abductees. A lot of that came from things like close encounters and so on, where people get whisked off by UFOs and returned decades later and so on. So about every 10 years, you get a new paradigm in ufology where you can usually track the cultural drivers. So again, reptoids come from David Icke, talking about the royals being reptoid shapeshifters, things like that. You can trace it to the sources, and the paradigm shifts, and there's a whole new array of books and personalities and stories that go with it. And the people always insist that actually their story has been the story about UFOs since the beginning, and it's not. And you can, even from the start, when people were encountering aliens, the accounts of sort of the first contactees back in the late 40s, early 50s, heavily driven by cultural inputs from theosophy in particular, and ascended masters and all that kind of stuff. But Polts, you can have a major film like Poltergeist, which, exaggerates, throws in factors that have got nothing to do with real poltergeists. It's a great film, but it isn't a sort of textbook representation of what real poltergeists are like. Now, when you do that with UFOs, you find that the stuff from the films kind of feeds into the UFO culture, and you see it being sort of thrown back at you in the subsequent reports. But it had absolutely no effect on poltergeist stories. They just kept on being exactly the same. With fairies, every culture has got some sort of fairy type thing, which behave in essentially the same way. There's a repertoire of stuff about playing tricks and kidnapping people and substituting children, and occasionally helping and being whimsical and slightly annoying and popping up and disappearing, and generally being quite small, although sometimes they can be, you can get big fairies. Mostly not little things with wings. So there's a certain amount of cultural influence on fairy reports, but more so than Polts, but they seem to be pretty solidly the same everywhere. That's not to say that they're not some sort of projection of humans. I mean, any of this stuff could be. But
I see crossovers as well between the different things. So
everything crosses over.
So like boggarts sound very similar to poltergeist to me. I think it was John Fraser in his book was comparing poltergeist to was it Romanian vampires or something? Some of the stories were very similar.
Yeah, I mean,
and
there's
you can
all
see how
sorts of
they
things.
mix up.
and I mean, you get Bigfoots who fly off in UFOs. Uh, bogus social workers could conceivably, be fairies, because they've just updated their child kidnapping shtick to the modern world, because nobody's been able to identify them or catch them. Somebody at the weekend what's his name? Terrible at remembering names. So that actually, they were almost certainly, they're believed to be the bogus social workers, people from a very small evangelical sect who were probably at one of those tiny house churches who were seeking the Antichrist, apparently, and they were searching for going around and uh, checking on likely children to see if they could identify the Antichrist, which makes complete sense. And I can understand that, but I like the idea that they're fairies who've updated their technique for slipping chains into the world. But
It's not something I ever really believed in, and I had to do a bit of research on fairies for my work. And then I found Joe Hickey Hall's Modern Day Fairy Sightings podcast, and all the stories that people still have experiences, was really interesting. So I'm a bit more open-minded about them than I was, I think. But yeah, an interesting subject.
Yes.
So, have you experienced anything paranormal yourself?
Probably not. I mean, there's a few sort of ghost things that I didn't put in the book because they really happened in quite visually boring locations, so that the publishers, well, we can't really get a good photograph to go with that, or in locations that have vanished. One of the locations which has vanished was the King's Cellars pub in Park Lane in Croydon, where I was brought up, and it was a very unprepossessing 1950s underground pub, part of an office block complex, and it had a long-running haunting with a quite energetic poltergeist. Got through lots of managers who were freaked out by it and so on. Allegedly, it was the result of somebody who worked in the tower block adjacent to it jumping off the top and dying on the roof of the pub, although there is no actual record of any death that conforms to the legend. But I was down there, I suppose, in my early 20s, and I had my back to the bar, and there was this almighty sort of glass smashing sound, and a whole bunch of beer glasses had fallen off of a shelf and shattered on the floor. So I turned around and the bar went, "Don't worry, it's only the ghost." So it may have been the Polt. It also may have been a fat-fingered bar person fumbling a bunch of glasses and making a jokey reference. So I can't say that for certain, but I just feel it's it. Another one that we didn't put in was happened in my childhood home, because that part of was just an ordinary house in suburban Croydon, and again, not particularly photogenic. But my mother tended to had all sorts of extraordinary experiences. She was quite psychic and could see all sorts of things. But this one had more than one witness, which didn't include me, but I was in the next room watching television when it happened. So my mother had a friend round for the evening, and she was being picked up by her partner, and she'd rung him up, and he was coming round, and we had one of those sort of pebble dash glass front door things, so you could see shapes through it, but you couldn't make out what they were. So Mum and her friend are waiting in the hall, expecting this woman's partner to turn up any minute and pick her up. And they see this shape of a figure advancing up the garden path. So they go, oh, there he is. And they open the front door. It's not him. It's the chap who lived next door.
Yeah.
Except by then he'd been dead for 25 years.
Right.
When he was alive, though, he used to come along the path. There was a footpath along the top of the road, which led to a convenient bus stop. And he used to take a bus to work, and then coming home, he'd walk along the path, come up. But our front garden and next door's front garden didn't have a fence between them. There was just a big lawn at the front, which ran across the front of both houses. And he used to come up our drive and walk across the lawn to his front door. And this is what he was doing. He walked up the path, across the front lawn, and straight through the closed neighbour's front door.
Right.
There were different people living there by then as well. And my mother went, that's so-and-so, his name. Her friend totally freaked out. Like, I heard this
Understandably,
I heard this commotion, and what's going on? And my mum said, "You'll never believe this," but yeah. So I just missed it by moments. Her friend was seriously freaked out and refused ever to come back to the house. So I mentioned in the book that there's a couple of ghosts who I knew in real life. That's one of them. And the other one is my Fortean Times colleague, Steve Moore, who is a very respected writer of comics and scholar of the I Ching and so on, who lived up in Shooters Hill. And he died in 2014, far too young. He was only 66. He was a really great chap, and as I mentioned, him working with Alan Moore earlier for their book. And he was a regular clipping sorter for Fortean Times and really influential on the magazine's development. Was right there at the start with Bob Rickard, our founder. And but his health was not great. He had lots of heart problems, and yes, he sort of had a massive heart attack and died on the spot one Friday afternoon. But he wasn't found until the following Monday, when people sort of were beginning to get a bit concerned they hadn't heard from him. So they called the police and they went round and they looked in his windows and they put ladders up and finally found him upstairs in his study. So anyway, people sort of went round and told his neighbours that Steve had died and so on. And they went, he died on Friday. And no, he didn't. He was definitely in the front garden and waved to us as we went past. And another one, I think, said they passed him on the way to the pub as well. During the weekend, nobody spoke to him, but they saw him and he waved and, was generally being Steve. But all the sort of medical and circumstantial evidence pointed to him having been dead for several days when he was found, and pretty much puts his time of passing as mid-Friday afternoon quite accurately. So he was, definitely around in phantom form for a few days afterwards. And I mean, as a Fortean, he went out in style, because not only did he do that, when Alan and Bob were going through his stuff, because they were executors and had to sort out his house and all that, they found his dream diary, and looking back through his dream diary about 2 or 3 weeks before his passing, he had recorded a dream in which there were men on ladders peering through his house window, which is what exactly the police had done to find his body. So yeah, yay, Steve.
So the Fortean Times is over 50 years old, and you've been working there for over 30 years. What has been the story that has stuck with you most from all those years?
I mean, I started. Yes, Fortean Times was started in 1973 by Bob Rickard, and it's had a sort of long and storied history, and it's still going strong. Thank goodness. I I discovered it in the early 80s properly, and started contributing clippings, and then I volunteered to help sort the clippings. Uh, in the early 90s, I swiftly got roped in to do various um, reviews and columns and write articles, and my actual career was as a museum curator, and I did an exhibition on Fortean phenomena for Croydon Museum with Fortean Times in 1995. And so, I had involvement on the side, and then having sort of retired at 60, when the sort of museum consulting business really went pear-shaped after COVID, it was one of those things where everybody realised that I was ostensibly at a loose end, and kept sort of going, "Oh, would you like to?" And so I ended up um, uh, picking up the news editor mantle when the previous news editor, had to give up about 4 years ago. So I've now properly joined the core team of Fortean Times and been doing the news for the last 4 years. I also got rounded up by a friend's blockchain law tech startup to do writing for them. And various things. So I'm just as busy as I ever was. It's what's my favourite story? I'm quite fond of Sandown Sam, the sort of strange clown-like entity who appeared on the Isle of Wight in 1973. It's utterly bizarre, and there's been some new revelations about it, which are coming out in the next issue of Fortean Times, which are quite boggling. And so I rather like that one at the moment. One which many people remember fondly is the photograph of the Spanish chap crushed by an avalanche whilst having sex with a chicken. I went to the People's Day of Death in Liverpool last year to do the Fortean Times school, spelt with a K, of strange death, which was getting people to do their own interpretation, visually or otherwise, of various strange death stories, and made a big scroll. And Daisy Campbell, who is the sort of key person for organising and running the event, the daughter of the um, uh, late great Ken Campbell, theatrical maverick, Fortean, and general force for joyful mischief and cultural provocateurism. And she went, "Oh, my favourite was that chicken one." And lots of people, it's a bit like that. Bit like the book, it was published. Well, it must be about 30 years old, that story, but it's really stuck in lots of people's minds. The photo is very dubious, I have to say. I'm not sure. Nobody quite. I rather suspect it's not.
I wonder if that chicken came back as a ghost.
Yes, I do wonder. Yes, it's very dubiously. Its provenance is very dubious, but that is just mind-boggling. So that's the kind of the two ends of the Fortean spectrum, which is sort of, weird coincidences and bizarre human behaviour, and generally high weirdness, paranormal stuff. We widened the sort of bandwidth of the Fortean to include sort of strange, eccentric, and stupid human behaviour, as well as the sort of bizarre and paranormal, and that seems to fit totally in there. And we do like a good strange death. I was talking to various people at the Strange Days Festival at the weekend, and they kept saying, "Oh, we always start at the back with the strange deaths column." But because there are some, yes, wild stuff goes on.
So, which cryptid would you most like to be real, and would you like to meet it?
Cryptid. I don't know whether Jeff the Talking Mongoose counts as a cryptid, but I rather like him.
Probably, yeah.
Yes, I'd quite like to meet Jeff.
I saw there was a film about that recently, wasn't there? Yeah.
Yes, it wasn't very good.
No.
Right, I mean, the Jeff story is wonderful.
I've read it. Yeah, it's great.
Yes, and the film just sort of exaggerated and messed about with it, and it's just a wonderful story if you just leave it alone and tell it like it is. There's actually a far better Jeff film than the one involving Simon Pegg, and that was done by the performance artist Brian Catling. And it's just talking heads talking to the camera in the persona of the various people involved. That is really good. It's on YouTube, and I'd probably recommend any Jeff the Talking Mongoose fans to look up the Brian Catling film on YouTube.
So you were speaking, as you said, at the Strange Day Festival, which, as we were recording early September, was last weekend. Can you tell us a bit about it? What were you speaking about at the festival?
Yes. Well, this one I was doing my sort of summary of 50 years of Fortean Times, sort of talking about its evolution, commemorating some of the wilder characters who took part in that. But Strange Days happened over the last weekend in Wiltshire. It was happening at in the field behind the Barge pub in Pewsey, or in Honey Street near Pewsey, which was the legendary Crop Circle pub back in the day. It's where it was Crop Circle Central. And they have a festival field behind it where a number of boutique festivals are run. And this year, our friend Matt Page decided to put on a festival of Forteana, which combined people giving Fortean talks with sort of Fortean adjacent music, I guess. So we had talks during the day and music during the evening, and we camped in the field. There was nice food. There was a pub on site, yay, with great beer. And about it sold out, 500 people, and we had all sorts of excellent talks from the likes of John Downes, the cryptozoologist, and Peter Laws, the sort of paranormal podcaster, and
Richard Freeman, I
Richard
think, was
Freeman.
there?
Yes, Richard Freeman was, particularly excellent, talking about his experience of hunting cryptids. I mean, he's great because he actually goes out and does this stuff. He was out in Mongolia looking for the death worm, things like that. So he doesn't just talk it, or go for walks in the woods and hope something turns up. Does serious expeditions, and they're well organised, and he's very good at sort of chasing the stories down. And he doesn't just sort of run about looking for things. He collects the sort of the local stories and connects with the local population to find out about what is going on. I mean, it's very good. And he was telling us about that sort of thing.
And Brian Blessed was there as well, was he?
Brian Blessed, yes, Brian Blessed turned up. He was there. He was one of the star guests, and he's 88.
Wow.
He's still as loud as ever, and still sort of a great teller of lurid and unlikely stories. Still swears a lot, and was magnificently entertaining for an hour, and absolutely loved him. It was a superb weekend. But the content was great, the music was great. It was headlined by Henge, but also got along other sorts of wonderful and bizarre people like Paddy Steer and the extraordinary experimental sound machines, which kind of it's, I mean, it's one person. It was one person in a strange costume, accompanied by a primitive robot dog made out of tinfoil that sort of beat a drum. And there was a fish mobile going around the front of the stage. It was a bit like if David Lynch had found the residents in a charity shop. It was just sort of, it was very Fortean, it fitted in perfectly. And yeah, lots of good stuff. It was a resounding success and will return next year.
Brilliant.
Put it in your diaries. Come along. You know, it was really worth it was worth trekking to the sort of the wilds of Wiltshire, sitting under the Pusey White Horse there.
So, how did you become a journalist? You said you worked in a museum to start
Yes,
with?
I mean, I'm not sure I'd necessarily call myself a journalist, but a writer about strange things, certainly. But yes, I mean, I've always written stuff. I know as a teenager, I contributed to youth club and school magazines, and then in the late 70s, early 80s, I was involved in sort of a punk fanzine or post-punk fanzine in Norwich called Don't Look Now. It's actually how I discovered Fortean Times, because we used to produce it in the Action Space at Freewheel Bookshop, which was a marvelous alternative bookshop run by an Australian anarchist woman, and they had this sort of facility for community groups and activists and so on and so forth to print and produce stuff. It's all quite primitive. We're on one of those. They produced it one of those Banda copiers, which require you to sort of cut things into a sort of membrane and put it on a drum and crank the handle, and it prints things in purple and pink ink. It's all very primitive. It seems in these days of sort of word processing and Photoshop and AI. But nonetheless, that's how you made zines back in those days, and then you stapled them all together and hawked them down the local record shops. But in the room where we were doing this, there was this stack of back numbers of Fortean Times, and I took to flicking through them on coffee breaks. It's great, so I bought a lot, and then subscribed and so on. But yeah, so I'd been writing for a long, long time, and being in museums actually ends up you do a lot of writing. And I mean, wider than that, I was more in science communication. I started in museums and went over to hands-on science centres, but through that, all aspects of science communication there. So I was writing marketing text and reports and things. So I did, an awful lot of writing of all different kinds, which made me very flexible. And at the same time, I had the public-facing side, which meant I had to be very clear and write sort of stuff that made complex concepts approachable by non-specialist audiences. So that really honed my ability to write quickly, accurately, and readably, which fed into the stuff I did over the years for Fortean Times. And I suppose, because I properly became a journalist when they recruited me as news editor 4 years ago.
Do you have any recommendations for people that are thinking on writing about the paranormal?
Do it. Do blogs. Find the zines. There's lots of new zines. I mean, it's a really lively zine culture that's sprung up over the last few years. There's any number of good little zines that are doing things. So, either get in touch with them and write about it, or start your own. I'm always a big fan of people starting their own. And FT is also open to contributors. We have the main route that new writers tend to get in through is the forum page, which is sort of 800-word pieces, and people send proposals for that to our editor. Quite often they get they get the go ahead, and there's all sorts of quite major writers who you can track back that their first actual appearance in print was on the Fortean Times um, uh, forum page. And I mean, actually, it's the 800 word pieces we always seem to be quite short of. We get any number of really, big major articles, and they back up for quite some time. My last one appeared relatively quickly, but the one before that had been in the file for about 6 years before it actually made it to the pages. But forum pieces go getting much more quickly. We're not, they're of a length which is not too difficult to write, and good deal of flexibility. So people can try that as well. But yes, the zine scene is a really good way in, and just and blogging online, writing medium pieces. There's far more opportunities for people to put their thoughts into text and get it read than there ever were. And it doesn't have to be perfect. The main thing is that you try, and your writing improves as you try, and you do it. It's not like you're having to make the definitive statement about everything right perfectly about it. Just get out there and do it. I mean, I'm ancient and whiskery now, but in the 70s, I was, I was very much on the London punk circuit, and I got the don't just sit around and wait for somebody to ask you to do it culture imbibed in me. It's get up and get and go. It's like the long forgotten now Desperate Bicycles, who did early sort of self-released singles. Their slogan was, "It was easy, it was cheap, go and do it." In fact, I had a song, I think, that said that. And that's truer now than ever. It was easy, it's cheap, go and do it.
That's great advice. I've written for zines myself. They're really fun to write for. So in fiction, there's always an inciting incident that sets the protagonist off on their journey. What incident started you on your journey to writing about the paranormal? Was there a particular thing that happened to you, or
not particularly to me, but there was a sort of family background in paranormal stuff. I mentioned my mother, being quite psychic and having a variety of experiences with ghosts and related things. Some of which were when I was sort of older and already into the paranormal and that, but she'd had ones going back. That weren't actually certainly Fortean, but not necessarily paranormal. One of the family stories that I always got told was about ball lightning appearing in my grandmother, my grandparents' house when my mother was a teenager, and it floated in through the window and sort of drifted across the dining room and then hit the wall with a kind of weird whoosh. Yeah, that was fascinating. And my
it's so
father,
rare, isn't it? Yeah.
yes. And my father was in the RAF in India, and on one occasion when he was coming back from, he was an armourer, and he'd been out to one of the anti-aircraft gun sites around the airfield that he was working on at the time to take some shells out to them, and on the way back it rained fish on him. Well, actually, no, it was rained frogs. It was frogs. Do beg your pardon. Rained frogs, and so he had an experience of a frog rain, and this would be a story. And also, my grandmother would talk about the time that her neighbour in Beddington was a splendidly named woman called Mrs. Hands, who was a medium, and how one day she was standing out the front of the house chatting to Mrs. Hands, and um, she turned to my grandmother and said, "Your father's with you, you know." My grandmother, being, a woman of the world and of a slightly cynical turn on such things, went, "Oh, yes, really? Then what does he look like?" "Oh, he's a small chap in a waistcoat with a bowler hat, and he's got a little dog with him." And absolute description of her father, who, he tended to wander out. He was wearing a waistcoat, a bowler hat firmly stuck on his head, which he almost never took off, apparently. And he had a succession of Jack Russell Terriers that always followed him around. So, and you could get told that story as well. And so, there was this kind of background noise of this, although, particularly my parents, they were the sort of first generation of the family to sort of ascend into the middle class. And, they'd been through the war, and they had this, quite determined intention to have a quiet and respectable life and to be normal. And so this kind of stuff lurked in the background, but it was never sort of part of their identity or something. They didn't really, it was there. It got mentioned. Nobody was particularly secretive about it, but it's kind of just not part of everyday life. But I kind of made it part of everyday life for me, because I spent a good few years trying to be normal and failed dismally, and so I just gave up.
That's boring being normal.
Yeah. Yes, Harry Dean Stanton in Repo Man. Normal people, I hate them.
So finally, where can people find you online? Do you have any website or social media? And where's the best place to buy your book as well?
My book will certainly available on, well-known online book sites. It's up for pre-order on Amazon. Lots of London, particularly bookshops, stock the Hoxton Mini Press books, and so that will be available there. It comes out on October the 2nd. There is a launch event at London Fortean Society on October the 16th, in which I will be giving a talk based on the book and signing it. And it's up on their website. Fortean Times does have a website, forteantimes.com, but that's basically a subscription website. Twitter, I refuse to call it X. And I have my own very opinionated accounts on both X, Blue Sky, as at Ian Simmons. And you can find Fortean Times in newsagents. The Smiths particularly stock it. I think they're still Smiths, aren't they? Sure. There's been some sort of business ramifications. We're going to come Jones or something. Who knows? But anyway, big high street newsagents usually have it. But the easiest way is to subscribe, and then you make sure you always get it through your letterbox, and it's cheaper that way.
Right, excellent. Thank you very much for talking to me. And it's been brilliant. And for everybody else, see you next time.
Okay.
Bye.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much, Karen.
There are stories galore